Chad used to throw out the word breakup whenever he felt like it, knowing how much I loved him. Every time, I would do everything I could to make him stay. The last time he said it, I looked at him for a long time and then said okay. 5 years. In the end, he finally wore my love down to nothing. Chapter 1. The day Chad broke up with me started over something trivial. His childhood friend Chloe was celebrating her birthday, and she had just returned from studying abroad. So Chad and their old circle planned a get-together to celebrate and welcome her back. He forgot to tell me. By the time he was getting ready to leave, I had already finished cooking. I'd spent hours simmering his favorite soup. I asked him to have some before he went. Standing by the entryway pulling on his shoes, he answered absently, "No time. I've gotta go." Just as he was about to step out, I called his name. He turned around. The dark marble wall behind him made him look even taller and sharper, but his expression was restless, impatient. I carried the bowl over and gently caught his wrist. "You woke up late. You haven't eaten. You'll probably be drinking later, just have a little first." He clicked his tongue in annoyance. "Can you stop hovering over everything? It's really irritating." He flicked his hand. Maybe he didn't mean to. But I was running a fever, weak and unsteady. The bowl slipped from my hands and shattered against the marble floor, soup and porcelain bursting outward in every direction. For a moment, the air went still. I paused, then lifted my gaze from the mess on the floor to his face. I tried to stay calm, even forced a faint smile. "You're this restless and excited today, is it because Chloe's back? I heard she's single again." Before he and I got together, he had chased after Chloe for years, openly and not so openly. When she found a boyfriend, he accepted me in the aftermath of that heartbreak. We'd been together ever since. 5 years now. My words struck a nerve. Chloe had always been the most untouchable name in his world. Even mentioning her felt like crossing a line. As expected, he bristled immediately. His handsome face hardened with irritation, brows drawn tight. "Anna, what's that supposed to mean? You think I'm cheating? Can you stop reading into every little thing? It's exhausting. If you have a problem, then let's just break up." He said it often. Breakup wasn't an event to him, just a convenient way to vent his frustration. Every time he said it, I would beg him to stay. But this time was different. After he spoke, I looked at him carefully, really looked. Then I smiled, soft and calm. "Okay, Chad." He seemed slightly surprised, but said nothing. He turned and walked out. He was in a hurry. He couldn't be late for Chloe's birthday. Chapter 2. Packing my things didn't take long. Chad had never liked me encroaching on his space, so there wasn't much of me in his place to begin with. After cleaning up the mess in the living room, I glanced at the remaining soup and placed it in the refrigerator. It would probably be the last time I ever made soup for Chad. Once everything was in order, I opened my messages. I'd meant to say a proper goodbye to him. After all, we'd been together for 5 years. But someone in our shared friend group had posted a video. It was filmed at a karaoke bar, one of those private room setups, neon lights flashing and the whole place buzzing with noise. Chad stood there, singing with a girl I hadn't seen in a long time but knew all too well. They were singing a cheesy love duet together. It was Chloe. After Chad and I got together, I'd once overheard one of his friends joking that this song was always their go-to whenever they sang together. It didn't carry any special meaning, really. When Chloe was little, she used to follow Chad around and tell him she'd marry him when she grew up. The song had simply become a long-running joke among their friends. I watched the video to the end. Then, after a moment's thought, I closed the chat window. I didn't think Chad needed my goodbye. Pulling my suitcase behind me, I took one last look at the empty, spotless living room before leaving. The shattered bowl, the spilled soup, the argument, all of it had been cleaned away, as if none of it had ever happened. I let out a quiet breath and found myself almost grateful Chloe had come back. While Chad was out celebrating her birthday and welcoming her home, those few uninterrupted hours had allowed me to pack up and leave his place calmly, without drama. I thought I might feel sad. 5 years was a long time. But when I got home, I was so exhausted that I fell asleep almost immediately. Chad called at 2 in the morning. He had clearly been drinking, his voice always lifted slightly when he was drunk. "Anna," he asked, "you didn't come pick me up?" Still half asleep, I murmured, "I'm sleeping." Whatever it is, let's talk tomorrow. The line went dead before I even finished speaking. I was a light sleeper. Once I woke up, I couldn't fall back asleep. The call puzzled me. Tonight he was supposed to be reuniting with his childhood friend after so long apart. If anything, he should have been escorting Chloe home. Instead, he was calling to question why I hadn't picked him up. Then it occurred to me, maybe it was just another one of those bets he made with his friends. Chapter 3. When Chad and I first started dating, he went out drinking with a group of friends one night. It was raining. I didn't want to interrupt their fun, so I waited for him at a bookstore across the street from the bar. I worried about him getting home safely if he got drunk. The moment he stepped outside, I saw him. I walked over under my umbrella, smiled, and said, "Chad, let's go home." I always thought the words us and home carried a quiet warmth. His friends started teasing him right away. Seriously, Chad? How did you even manage to land a girlfriend like Anna? She's so devoted. He hadn't landed me. I was the one who chased after him. But no matter how envious others sounded, he always seemed slightly annoyed. Maybe I treated him too well. So well that there was no mystery left, no challenge. People can be strangely perverse like that. He even asked me once, "Anna, don't you have a life of your own?" I did. I was busy. Around that time, I'd just been invited to hold my first solo exhibition. But outside of creating my work, nearly all my time and energy revolved around him. I remember smiling and telling him, "You are my life too." Back then, I thought it was a quiet confession I was making across the long stretch of time we shared. Now that I think about it, he must have found it suffocating. Once, I had waited outside a bar, sketchbook in hand, drawing while I waited for him so we could go home together. When he came out and saw me, he smiled like he'd expected it all along. Then each of his friends handed him some cash. "You won again," they laughed. Chad had bet them I'd show up to pick him up. He must have lost that bet this time. That was probably why he'd called me earlier, irritated and short-tempered. I got out of bed to pour myself a glass of water. After drinking it and heading back toward the bedroom, my phone rang again. Several missed calls. When I answered, I was slightly surprised. "What is it?" There was a brief pause. His voice carried no obvious emotion. "Anna," he said, "I'm back." "Where are your things?" He had actually noticed that I'd cleared everything out of his place. I'd assumed it would take him at least a few days to realize. Patiently, gently, I reminded him, "Chad, did you forget? We broke up 7 hours ago. You said it yourself." I agreed. He went silent. Just when I wondered if the call had dropped, he suddenly spoke, irritation creeping into his voice. "Fine. Don't come crawling back asking to get back together." Chapter 4. Chad didn't understand. I wasn't going to get back together with him. Strangely enough, in the 5 years we'd been together, I had never once felt disappointed in the relationship. I'd never felt tired of loving him, never seriously considered leaving. And yet now that I'd walked away so easily, I didn't feel heartbroken either. Lily once said my love for Chad was like money sitting in his bank account. That day, she lounged on the couch with her legs crossed, eating chips, with the air of a philosopher. "Anna," she said, "your love for Chad is like money he keeps withdrawing from without ever making a deposit. He's been overdrafting for years. Of course the account's empty now." It was an oddly fitting metaphor. My love for Chad had long since slipped into the red. Lily asked what I planned to do next. I shrugged. Work. My solo exhibition had already secured funding and a venue. I planned to spend more than a year traveling, capturing the most beautiful places I could find through my art. My first destination would be a river in Spain known for its deep crimson color, caused by minerals in the surrounding land. I wanted to see if I could use its water as pigment in my work. Just thinking about it filled me with excitement. Before I left, Lily said, "I'm relieved to see you like this. I was worried you'd get upset seeing Chad's posts." I had seen them. Chad had never been the type to post much. In 5 years together, he'd only shared a handful of updates. But over the past few days, his social media had been unusually active, photos of him taking Chloe sightseeing around the city, photos of them trying different restaurants. I could understand his excitement at her return. Still, the frequency of the posts almost made me wonder if he was doing it on purpose, hoping I'd see them and feel jealous. The thought surfaced briefly, then faded just as quickly. I scrolled past and let it go. Lily looked at me with admiration. Only you could be this devoted, and this ruthless at the same time. Devotion was the greatest respect I could give a relationship. Ruthlessness was the respect I owed myself. On the ride home, I saw another of Chad's posts. He and Chloe were at the zoo, taking a selfie with an alpaca. I exited the app, then after a moment's thought, changed my profile picture. My profile picture had been taken by Chad. It was from a trip we took for our first anniversary. He'd been photographing the scenery when I accidentally walked into the frame, eating an ice cream cone. He'd frowned at the photo back then, ready to delete it. But I loved it, so I kept it as my profile picture. For 5 years. Now I changed it to a photo of the cat I just adopted. Chapter 5. Chad messaged me just before I boarded my flight. It was the 14th day since we'd cut off contact. He sent a single question mark, then followed with, "You changed your profile picture." A simple statement. Even without seeing his face, I could imagine the slight frown as he stared at his phone. I thought about replying. Then I locked the screen and didn't answer. I boarded my flight to Spain. I spent a wonderful month by the red-tinted river there. I turned off my phone, shut out social media and distractions, and focused entirely on my work. That was also where I met someone interesting. His name was Eric. The first time we met, I was knee-deep in the river, pant legs rolled up, scooping mud into a bucket for pigment. Suddenly, someone grabbed me from behind and lifted me off the ground. For a split second, I thought I was being attacked. Instinct took over. I swung my hand back and smeared a full scoop of thick red mud straight across his face. He froze. His face was completely covered in crimson sludge. His eyes were shut tight, but he still held on to me, steady and firm. Then he spoke in English, voice gentle and urgent. "It'll all be over soon. You still have a long life ahead of you." He thought I was trying to kill myself. I stopped struggling. The tension drained from my body, replaced by something close to laughter. I patted the arm still wrapped around my waist and explained that I was just collecting material for painting. That was how we met. Because I'd thrown so much mud at him, he couldn't see a thing. I guided him to the nearest clean stream so he could wash up. Once the mud was gone, I finally saw his face clearly. He was strikingly handsome, and to my surprise, he slipped into the same familiar language without hesitation. Running into someone from the same place when you're far from home always feels unexpectedly comforting. After everything was sorted out, I apologized, feeling a little guilty. He was easygoing about it, not upset at all. When he smiled, he looked effortlessly charming, bright and warm. He even gave me a thumbs up, praising my instincts and quick reaction. According to him, he'd been vacationing along the southern coast and happened to drive past the river. From a distance, he saw me standing in the water and assumed I was about to jump. Acting on impulse, he rushed over to pull me out, only to end up nearly blinded by mud. When he heard about my project, he became genuinely intrigued. Curious by nature, he ended up changing his travel plans just to stay and see whether the river's mineral-rich water and sediment could truly be turned into usable pigment. I accepted his request without hesitation. He was the kind of person who understood boundaries instinctively. Polite, measured, never intrusive. Being around him felt effortless. He never interrupted when I was working. If I lost track of time and forgot to eat, he would quietly ask the hotel staff to leave food outside my door, knock lightly 3 times, and leave without waiting. Chapter 6. By the time I finally stepped out of my room again, more than half a month had passed. The innkeeper's daughter was chatting with Eric in the lobby. The locals seemed to like him. He declined her politely, then glanced toward me. His eyes moved over me from head to toe before a faint smile touched his lips. "When this painting is exhibited," he said, "no one will imagine what the artist went through to create it." I laughed. I was covered in paint and dried river sediment, looking like I'd just been dug out of the earth. I had just finished a piece I was deeply proud of, so I let Eric's teasing slide. I tilted my head back and smiled at him, a little excited. "Weren't you curious? Now's your chance to satisfy that curiosity." He looked at me, momentarily taken aback for reasons I couldn't quite read. Then I led him to my studio. A long canvas stretched across the wall, nearly 2 meters wide, capturing every detail of the Crimson River and the landscapes along its banks. The moment he stepped inside, the surprise and admiration in his eyes filled me with quiet satisfaction. He stood there for a long time, taking it in, before turning toward me and saying sincerely, "It's an honor to be the first person to see this." Afterward, I took him out to dinner as a thank you for the unspoken care he'd shown me over the past few days. 3 days later, we parted ways. We were both the kind of people who followed our own paths without hesitation. We didn't even exchange contact information. To us, the other had simply been an unexpected but pleasant addition to the journey. A stranger who made that stretch of road more interesting. Once his curiosity was satisfied, he returned to his original travel plans. I stayed a few more days, then prepared to head home. I didn't expect to see him again on the return flight. By sheer luck, I was upgraded to first class. When I stepped inside, I almost thought I'd mistaken someone else for him. Before we parted, Eric had said he'd be staying for another 2 weeks. He looked just as surprised to see me. Then he gave a helpless shrug and said, "Family business emergency. I have to go back and put out a few fires." I couldn't help smiling. By the time we landed, it was nearly 2 in the morning. His driver was already waiting outside the airport. With effortless courtesy, Eric asked, "If you don't mind, may I give you a ride home?" I thought about it briefly, then accepted with a quiet thank you. When the car stopped in front of my building, I got out and thanked him again. Seeing that I had too much luggage, he stepped out as well and offered to help carry it upstairs. I was still hesitating when a voice suddenly called out from the shadows near the landscaped bushes. "Anna." Chapter 7. It was Chad. His tone revealed nothing. I turned toward the sound. He stood half hidden in the shadows, then slowly stepped into the light. In just over a month, he'd grown noticeably thinner. His gaze moved from Eric to me, and a cold smile spread across his face. "So that's why you wanted to break up," he said. "You were already seeing someone else." I forced myself to stay calm. I thanked Eric and said, "Goodbye." First. We were little more than passing acquaintances, yet he'd shown me so much kindness. He glanced at Chad and quietly asked if I needed help. When I shook my head, he nodded and left with perfect tact, giving me the space to handle things on my own. Chad's eyes fixed on me. He looked almost ferocious, yet somehow like a stray about to be abandoned, his harshness a thin cover for something closer to panic. "You broke up with me," he asked, "because you fell for someone else?" For some reason, I felt tired. Maybe it was the backlash of years spent accommodating his moods. He was always polite and distant with others, but with me, he carried himself like everything was owed to him. I was exhausted by it. Still, I kept my voice steady and explained patiently, "Chad, you're the one who asked for the breakup. Eric and I just happened to meet in Spain. You can't keep." I stopped, unable to find the right word. My tone must have surprised him. He froze for a moment, something like hurt flashing across his eyes before disappearing just as quickly. After a long pause, he spoke again, his voice suddenly very soft. In 5 years together, it was probably the first time he had ever lowered himself like this. "I heard from Lily that you were coming back tonight," he said quietly. "I've been waiting here since 6. Anna, you didn't reply to my messages." He paused, then asked, almost carefully, "In the past month, did you ever think about me?" I hadn't expected that question. I stood there, momentarily stunned. But when I searched my memory of the past month, all I felt was the satisfaction of creating, of living fully in my work. Not once, not a single time, had I thought of Chad. I said nothing. Under the streetlight, he stared at me with unsettling focus, as if trying to read straight through my expression and into my heart. After a long moment, he let out a self-mocking laugh and said quietly, almost to himself, "I don't believe you." Chapter 8. Chad had always been confident in his disbelief. I'd loved him for a very long time, so long that I could no longer remember what had first drawn me to him. It was as if whatever feelings I'd once had faded with time, leaving only the inertia of years spent caring, accommodating, loving out of habit rather than passion. I knew he had always loved Chloe. The night he finally gave up on her was when she left the country with a teacher from their school. I don't know if young love is always that fearless. That night, he chased them all the way to the airport, only to watch as the man took Chloe's hand and led her through the departure gate, the two of them laughing and talking. He stayed there long after they were gone. Neon lights burned through the night, too bright, too merciless, exposing every trace of grief on his face. Only after a long time did he finally stand and walk out of the airport. I followed him the entire way. He didn't notice at first. When he finally did, all the anger and heartbreak he'd been holding in turned on me. "Are you following me to watch me fall apart?" he snapped. "Just go away." I stopped about 50 yards behind him and said quietly, "I'm just worried about you." That night he walked all the way back to his dorm. Miles and miles, through the dark, until morning. It was probably the most defeated he'd ever looked. I followed him the whole way, keeping my distance, walking until dawn beside the shape of his loneliness. When he finally reached the building, he turned back suddenly and asked, "Do you really like me that much? Then, let's just be together." I froze for a moment. Then I smiled. From that day until now, 5 years had passed. Lily once called me pathetic for loving him like that. But I wasn't. I was simply living honestly. Life is short. I only wanted to follow my heart and do what I truly wanted. When Chad asked if I wanted to be with him, I stood there for those 10 silent seconds and asked myself 4 questions. Did I know he loved someone else? Yes. Did I know he didn't love me? Yes. Would I regret it if I said no? Yes. Did I want him anyway? Yes. The answer was simple. They say forced fruit is never sweet, but if you never taste it, how will you know? I knew exactly what I was doing. 5 years ago when I chose to be with him, I was clear-headed. 5 years later when I chose to leave, I was just as clear. I got what I wanted. Compared to those who never even get the chance to be with the person they love, I don't know if I was fortunate or not. But at least I knew how to hold on and how to let go. I let Chad go. Chapter 9. Chad still stood in front of me, his tall frame blocking most of the streetlight. He leaned slightly closer, staring down at me as if determined to find some trace of hidden sorrow on my face. For some reason, I suddenly asked, "Chad, do you remember the first time you ever tried to break up with me?" He clearly hadn't expected that question. He paused, caught off guard. The first time he'd tried to break up with me was about 3 months into our relationship. He'd ended things with a text, forgotten about it almost immediately, and left for a week-long trip with his friends. The day he came back, I was waiting outside his dorm. It was raining. My hair and clothes were soaked through, and I had a fever. When he saw me standing there, he looked startled. "What are you doing here?" I'd been hurt, of course. But I still smiled at him. Maybe he softened then. Maybe his heart had already given up on Chloe and it didn't matter who he was with anymore. So we got back together. I asked him, "Chad, during those days when you were away, after we broke up the first time, did you ever think about me? Even once?" I let out a quiet breath. "I was exactly where you are now." His expression darkened as my words settled in. After a moment, he took a step back, then another, before turning and walking away. In his mind, the fact that he'd come to see me tonight at all was already a gesture of generosity. I was supposed to take the hint and accept the olive branch. Instead, I'd refused. Of course he was angry. When Lily heard that Chad had come looking for me, she was surprised. "Don't tell me he only realized how much he loved you after losing you?" I just smiled and said nothing. It wasn't love. It was possession. The devoted girlfriend who used to orbit around him had suddenly vanished after the breakup, packing up everything, disappearing completely from his world. No messages. No attempts to reconcile. No habitual care or attention. It wasn't love. It was his ego. Someone who used to orbit around him had suddenly disappeared without a trace. No messages. No attempts to come back. No quiet care he'd long taken for granted. He didn't come looking for me because he missed me. He came back to see whether he could still get a reaction out of me. That was what I'd been to Chad. He came back not because he missed me, but because my disappearance had been unexpected. He needed to know whether I was still within reach, still under his control. If I showed even the slightest trace of lingering affection, I knew he'd lose interest instantly and walk away again. Lily said I was overthinking it. I didn't argue. Chapter 10. Chad began appearing in my life more and more often. Ironically, after we broke up, he reached out more frequently than he ever had during the entire year we were together. It started when he found a stuffed bear at his place that I'd forgotten to take with me. It was the first birthday gift he'd ever given me. I liked hugging something when I slept, an unconscious habit, so he'd given me the bear to hold at night. On the phone, he asked, "Do you want to come get it, or should I drop it off?" I paused, then said, "No need. Just throw it away." There was a long silence on his end. Before he hung up, I added quietly, "If you find anything else I left behind, just take care of it. You don't need to contact me." He didn't respond. That night he called again. I ignored the first call, but the phone kept ringing. With a sigh, I finally answered. He was drunk. That surprised me. He'd always known his limits when drinking. I'd never seen him actually drunk before. His words slurred slightly. You still have something here. Patiently, I said, I don't want it. Just throw it away for me. Anne. Chad, don't call me late at night anymore. I won't be picking up. He spoke as if he hadn't heard me. The necklace. The one you liked, the César design. I bought it. You forgot to take it. It was the gift I'd mentioned for our 5th anniversary. 2 weeks before the date, I told him how much I loved that necklace, the symbolism behind it, the way the designer had created it to represent a 5-year relationship. It had felt meaningful. He'd nodded at the time. But on the day of our anniversary, he'd forgotten. Forgotten the necklace. Forgotten the date. 3 days later, Chloe came back from the US. All he could think about was celebrating her birthday, preparing gifts, planning a welcome party, making sure everything was perfect for her return. And then we broke up. You see, the reason I stopped loving him wasn't one single moment. It was the accumulation of all of them. My voice turned cold. It's too late, Chad. There was noise on the other end, voices overlapping. Someone took the phone from him. It was one of his friends, sounding apologetic. Anna, I'm sorry. Chad's drunk. He hesitated, then added, he looks really upset. Is there really no chance for you two to get back together? I hung up. Afterward, I lay there staring at the ceiling. To say I felt nothing would have been a lie. I had loved him, truly loved him. I just couldn't reconcile the two versions of him. The indifferent Chad from before and the suddenly gentle Chad now. His tenderness and concern had always arrived too late, never when they were needed. Chapter 11. After that call, Chad disappeared from my life for a long time. The next time I saw him was 3 months later. We had broken up in early summer. By the time autumn deepened, the air had turned cold and brittle. He stood outside the entrance to my apartment complex in a long black coat. Despite everything, it was hard to deny how striking he looked. He was smoking. The last time he'd smoked this heavily was when Chloe left to study abroad. Back then, it had spiraled into late nights, alcohol, and eventually a hospital visit. Afterward, he'd forced himself to stop. I didn't know why he'd started again. He heard my footsteps and looked up. He seemed tired. I'm sorry, he said. I know I shouldn't bother you, but my mom is coming to the city this weekend. I haven't told her we broke up yet. It was strange. Even when Chad hadn't particularly liked me, his mother had adored me. The first time we met, she'd slipped a jade bangle off her own wrist and given it to me. After the breakup, I'd left it on Chad's nightstand. His mother had a heart condition. I hesitated. There was something almost pleading in his expression. Just 2 days. I'll explain everything to her afterward. Slowly. After a moment, I nodded. Relief flickered across his face. He stepped back, as if remembering to give me space. Thank you. Before leaving, he handed me a small bag. The weather's getting colder. Take care of your throat. It was an old problem of mine. Every autumn, as the temperature dropped, my throat would flare up again and again. Each year, Chad had asked friends abroad to bring back a particular supplement for me. If I started taking it early, I'd be fine. I hadn't expected him to remember. Standing there with the bag in my hands, watching him walk away, I felt something complicated settle in my chest. Chapter 12. Chad's mother stayed for 2 days before leaving. To keep up appearances, I'd moved a few of my things back into his place during her visit. After she left, I packed everything up again. Chad followed silently behind me. When I reached the stairs with my suitcase, he suddenly reached out and took my hand. He was tall, with sharp, defined features. When his face was expressionless, he always looked distant. Now he kept his eyes lowered, making it impossible for me to read him. Can't you stay? He asked quietly. After a moment, he looked up, forcing himself to explain. There's nothing between Chloe and me. I admit that when she came back, I felt something. But that was just a normal reaction to someone I once cared about. I never wanted to be with her. His voice caught slightly. He paused, then continued more steadily. Saying we should break up was my fault. It won't happen again. Anna, can you give me another chance? I had never seen him like that before. My thoughts were in disarray as I turned to leave. Maybe because my mind was elsewhere, my foot slipped on the step. In the next instant, I was tumbling down the stairs. I fractured my lower leg. Chad stayed with me at the hospital the entire time, handling the admission paperwork, taking care of everything. When I woke up after surgery, he was asleep beside my bed, his head resting on the edge of the mattress. Beds were scarce, and there were 4 patients to a room. His tall frame was awkwardly wedged between 2 hospital beds, limbs cramped, looking oddly pitiful. Even in sleep, his brows were tightly drawn, as if he couldn't fully relax. One of his hands still rested over mine, even in his sleep, perhaps so that if I moved, he would wake immediately. I thought about pulling away. I didn't. The anesthesia in my leg slowly faded, and the returning pain kept me awake. As I lay there staring at the ceiling, memories surfaced from long ago. Back then, I had just graduated and entered the working world, carrying the label of a prodigy from art school. A gallery investor invited me to dinner. I was young and naive, believing he genuinely appreciated my talent, until he pressed a third drink into my hand and casually draped his arm over my shoulder. That was when I understood. I excused myself to the restroom and called Chad. After hearing what was happening, he told me to stay inside and not come out. He arrived not long after. Without a word, he smashed a bottle over the man's head. The investor didn't even realize Chad was my boyfriend. He'd probably crossed too many women before. To him, Chad was just another angry boyfriend seeking revenge. Chad had told me not to come out because the less I was involved, the less influence that man could exert over me within the industry. Later, I found out that Chad had been in the middle of interviewing for his dream job that day. He'd already passed 3 rounds. He was supposed to meet the director for the final interview when my call came in. He left and came to me instead. He never once used that against me afterward, never complained, never mentioned losing the opportunity because of me. For some reason, all those memories came back at once. Even in the barren soil of our relationship, there had been moments like that, small, undeniable kindnesses. If I were honest, I felt myself wavering. Chapter 13. He stayed with me at the hospital until I was discharged. I told him he didn't have to. Lily could come stay with me. I wanted to cut things cleanly and move on. But he insisted on taking responsibility, saying my fall had something to do with him. Once Lily heard Chad was already there, she immediately started teasing that we might get back together and announced she wouldn't be coming after all. The elderly woman in the bed next to mine watched us with a gentle smile. "Young lady," she said, "your boyfriend is very devoted. Men like that are rare these days." I smiled. When I looked up, I saw Chad standing at the foot of my bed, watching me nervously. After a moment, he suddenly smiled too. The smile spread slowly from his eyes to his lips. It stayed there all the way until we were discharged and sitting in his car. Then he turned to me and said softly, "I'm happy, Anna. When that grandmother called me your boyfriend, you didn't deny it." I opened my mouth to explain. Honestly, it just hadn't seemed necessary. He'd stayed with me for so long, if I corrected her, there would have been more questions, more explanations. Since I was about to be discharged anyway, I simply didn't want to complicate things. But seeing the hope in his expression, I sighed and said nothing. Chad wanted to keep moving forward. And if it was the Chad I saw now, I realized I might be willing to try again. Could the love buried beneath years of dust ever return? That question lingered in my mind all the way until Chad drove me to his place. I'd fallen in a rush that day and left most of my belongings there. The last time his mother visited, she'd even brought me some dried fish I liked. So after leaving the hospital, we stopped by to pick up my things. When the door opened, I saw Chloe. She stood in the kitchen wearing an apron, a spatula in hand, smiling warmly like she belonged there. "Oh, you're back, Chad. When you said you were helping Anna get discharged today, I figured you two might not have had time to eat. Come in." She waved us inside. On her wrist was the jade bangle Chad's mother had once given me, the one I'd left behind after we broke up. My gaze shifted from the bracelet to Chad's face. Then, standing at the doorway, I suddenly laughed. It was a quiet, calm kind of laughter. A release. In that moment, I understood. Whatever had existed between Chad and me was over, completely, permanently. It didn't matter whether it was 5 years ago or now. Whenever we stood together, I had always been the one who didn't quite belong. But that was all right. I no longer minded. I stayed at the doorway, polite and distant. "No, it's fine. I have somewhere to be. I won't disturb you." Then I turned slightly toward Chad. I won't come in. Could you bring my things out? Thank you. His face went pale. He glanced at Chloe, then back at me. Before going inside, he said quietly, I'll explain everything in a minute. I didn't respond. After he stepped in, the smile on Chloe's face slowly faded. She looked at me the way one might look at an intruder. When she spoke again, her tone was sweet, but edged with something sharp. You're not going to make me lose money, are you? I raised an eyebrow. She smiled and explained, the day I came back, everyone said you and Chad had broken up. Chad and his friends bet that you'd come crawling back within 3 months. Later they extended it to 6. They all bet you would. I was the only one who said you wouldn't. She looked straight at me, enunciating each word. You're not going to make me lose, are you? I held her gaze. Instead of answering directly, I said calmly, whether you lose money or not isn't my concern. What I do know is that Chad's friends probably already won. When that teacher in the States dumped you and you had to come back, they were all betting on whether you'd come running to Chad to pick up the pieces. I smiled lightly at the way her face went pale. Looks like they won. At that moment, Chad came out with my luggage. I took it from him with a polite smile. Thank you. No need to walk me out. Lily's on her way. I won't keep you. At the very end, I looked at him once more and smiled, a quiet, relieved smile. Chad, if you want me to keep even a small, decent memory of you, please don't contact me again. That was the last thing I ever said to him. The last time I saw him. In a way, it was the final kindness he ever gave me. Chapter 14. 2 years later, I saw Eric again at one of my exhibitions. He was standing in front of the large canvas inspired by the Red River. I walked over and stood beside him. We hadn't seen each other in 2 years, yet there was no awkward small talk, just the easy familiarity of old friends. He turned toward me with a smile. I saw news about your exhibition and came by. It's even better than I imagined, he added. Then, after a brief pause, he asked with a hint of amusement, when the exhibition ends, may I invite the artist to dinner? I smiled back. Of course. Time moves on. Seasons change. When the sun sets, the moon rises. After spring comes summer, then autumn and winter. Life is long, and there are countless landscapes waiting to be discovered, each one meant to be experienced in its own time. As for what the future holds, you only find out by living it. At this point, my love life is a public service announcement. Free of charge.